Don't mark it most meaningful because you think it's going to highlight a skill. Mm-hmm. That is not how to put together the application. Application Renovation Season 4, Episode 15. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm excited to chat with you and hopefully see what we can do to make your next application cycle more successful than this one. Before we jump in, though, give us the nuts and bolts of this application cycle. Interviews, wait lists, anything like that? What's going on here?
I am currently waitlisted for one school that I interviewed at in Washington State, so Washington State University. And the interview went great, but I'm currently waitlisted. I know it's a very mission-driven school. That was the only interview that I received, and I applied to 20 schools, MD only. Okay. So I'm going to be applying DO as well this cycle.
Okay. Talk about the shortcomings you think of your application. 20 applications to 20 schools, only one interview. Where do you think you fell short?
It's hard to pinpoint exactly. I know that it's a really competitive process, and I did give it my all, but I think that if I was going to highlight my weaknesses, I know that I didn't do very well on cars on my MCAT. I was happy with my overall score, but that subsection score was really low. So I think that really kind of held me back. I also think that, I'm an older applicant and this is a career change for me. So I have a lot of experiences that are not medicine related. And so I think that I didn't really focus on the medical aspect as much as I really could have with a lot of my activities, and especially my personal statement. I feel like I talked a lot about everything else that I've done in my life, but didn't really hit the mark and answer the question of why I want to be a doctor.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. Something I think I want to try to integrate a little bit more into application renovation is trying to understand the mindset of where you were coming from with the application that you put together, the one that we'll see today. What was your goal, you think, with the application?
Well, aside from getting into medical school, I really wanted to stay local. I'm also a California resident.
Not the goal of getting into medical school. The goal of how you put together the application, like the stories that you told, the activities that you focused on, what you were saying. What was your goal there?
So I really wanted to portray who I was, because I feel that I have a lot, like I said, a lot of different experiences and a lot of strengths that I've gathered throughout my life. And I really wanted to sort of package each of those and let each medical school see me. My biggest goal was I just wanted to get the interviews because I felt like I can talk really well. I can speak with somebody. I can really get to know somebody from a personal level. And so I feel like there was part of it that just I didn't really get the chance because I didn't get those interviews.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think as we'll see going through, I think you did exactly what you hoped to do to show you. Unfortunately, what you did was you showed you outside of medicine and your thoughts on how that fits into medicine, when ideally I want to see some of you in medicine as well, so that I understand that you as well. And then all of the other stuff outside of medicine you is amazing experience that really shows how well-rounded you are and all of that fun stuff. So that's what we'll dig into today. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. So as you can see, the first thing I always love to highlight is when you applied. You applied late June, which is perfectly fine. No issues there. And this is first application cycle for you?
Yes.
Okay. So first application cycle, applied in June, no issues, doesn't have to be first day. Everyone tries to get in first day. I always highlight this SES disadvantage just to remind students this is automatically calculated, typically based on education, occupation of parents, which we have redacted out, which is fine. No big red flags, which we like. No military service. The interesting thing that I saw initially was, oh, you're older, right? 2004 to 2005, taking dual enrollment credit, and then a skip between high school and freshman year. So you took some time off between high school and college. And then you start a little bit of college in 2008, and you're like, yep, nope, not not for me. It seemed like. And then you came back several years later and started your high school or your college journey, a much better student, obviously struggling a little bit with your dual enrollment credit, with your first freshman grade, and then coming back much, much stronger. What was that kind of thought process for you as a student going, yeah, not ready. I don't want to do this yet?
It didn't have, I didn't have as much forethought about what I was doing back then. And I don't think I really realized that those grades would follow me forever at that point. So
forever, ever. Yes.
I was really focused on being a jeweler when I was in high school. I started a business when I was 14. And so taking dual enrollment high school and college classes allowed me to graduate earlier and spend more time in the jewelry room.
Okay.
So that was my main goal with doing dual enrollment. It was a running start program. So I was able to graduate high school early.
Okay.
And when I came back in 2008 and 9, that was just for one single class. I took yoga and I just didn't finish the class. I didn't keep going.
So you're not a yogi.
No.
Okay. So it sounds like education was just not the path that you needed to go on because you're like, I'm a successful jeweler. I'm making jewelry. What is there a fancy name for someone who makes jewelry?
I'm a goldsmith.
A goldsmith. All right. So that's awesome. So you're like, this is my life. This is what I'm doing. I don't need school to do this. I'm doing it now successfully. Okay. That makes sense. And then obviously at some point you're like, oh crap, like I need to go back to school because I want to go be a doctor. And we'll dive into that story a little bit. All right. So obviously you went back to school at some point. You're taking biology, physics, chemistry classes. So pre-med-ish looking. Were you pre-med at this point when you went back to school?
From the start.
Okay. All right. So then we have really good grades once you found a focus and you're dedicated to this. So when we look at GPA, science-wise, luckily, because yoga isn't a science class, your grades are mostly good from a science perspective. Overall, great. Obviously, that 295 from your high school is still there, but doesn't affect you a ton, which is awesome. And then we get to your MCAT score. And your MCAT score was decent, 507, not terrible, not amazing. You had mentioned your CAR score. I'm not super concerned about your CAR score, right? Overall, 507 is good. Lots of students are super concerned about unbalanced MCAT scores and a subsection less than a 125 or a 124. I've seen students get in with 121s in the CAR section. So not a huge deal. Depends on the school, as always. But not the biggest issue, but it sounds like you're planning on retaking that.
I mean, I really didn't want to, but because the score was, I took this in 2020, so it was 2 years ago. So for me, studying again, I started studying last month after I was certain I wasn't getting off of a wait list, or pretty sure I was not going to get off a wait list. I dove right back into studying again to see if I could just fix the weak points. And this was one that I saw as fixable. Okay.
And what's the plan in terms of how do you fix that CAR score? Because that's a hard one because it's hard to really study for the CAR section.
Yes, it is really hard to study for the CAR section. My biggest weakness in CARs is I panic. I panic and I rush through and I read too fast and then I can't really answer the questions very well. And I usually always end up skipping a whole 2 passages. Wow. So I did actually just sign up for I'm almost finished with the Jack Weston course.
Okay.
For CARs. And that's actually been really helpful. And just trying to practice timed passages more often, just to let my sort of anxieties calm down just for that specific section.
Do you listen to the MCAT CARs podcast that I did with Jack Weston?
Yes.
Okay, good.
And I listened to a lot of it the first time around too. So I'm kind of going back
don't
around.
Say that. All right. So potentially working on a new MCAT score. As we're recording this, it's May. When are you retaking?
So June 17th is my retake.
Okay.
So that was as late as I could possibly do it. I'm still going to obviously apply first and just have that score updated, assuming I do better.
Awesome. Okay, that works. All right, so let's get into the activity section because here's where I think the application starts to fall down a little bit due to some very specific things, and we'll point those out. So we get to harm reduction services volunteer. You mark this as not medical or clinical. I'm wondering what your thought process was behind not marking that as medical clinical.
I guess I hadn't even considered it as being a clinical position. I do run the syringe exchange, but it's not in a clinical setting. I mean, we do some clinical things there, like STD testing and blood testing and things like that. But my job is, handing out syringes and accepting used ones.
Yeah.
So, and interacting with a lot of the homeless population in Sacramento too. So, would you consider that as a clinical experience?
It depends. It depends on exactly what you're doing. If you're sitting there literally just handing out syringes and taking them, then maybe not. If you're having conversations around the use of safe needles and clean needles and not reusing needles, all of that stuff, then potentially you're getting into more of that interaction with a quote unquote patient. It's a very common kind of mistake that students make, thinking clinical experiences only happen in clinical environments. The location doesn't matter. It's all about what you are actually doing. So I think potentially, right, addicts and those who are currently homeless, that experience, those people could be considered patients. Who are seeking out services, who need your help, who are looking for those conversations about how to safely, as safely as you can, use drugs, right? And having those needle exchanges and stuff, I think potentially could. So again, a lot of it is how you frame it, but that's one potential way to think about it. The takeaway here. So again, I'm going to try to reframe application renovation a little bit. Tell me about your thought process with writing this description.
So I was trying to really get across like the impact that it had on me, and more specifically, the impacts that the individual people have had on me.
Yep.
Because, they're not my general population that I hang out with and go get a coffee with, so it's an opportunity for me to, sort of look into these lives and experience or share in their experiences by listening and talking to them. And I felt that was like a really powerful thing for me with this experience.
Yep.
However, I do see that you have the date highlighted because I had just started this within a month.
Yeah.
So from now, a year later, my experiences there have been so much richer than they had been at that point when I was writing this.
Good. And how were you on your hour estimate? Was that pretty spot on?
It was pretty close.
Yeah.
It's pretty close.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when I read this, the thing that I take away, number one, is try to name people, right? Saying Johnny versus a man just makes it much more relatable. So that's number one. And then I highlighted this: no one chooses to sacrifice their limbs, but the power of dependence can overcome all logic. I try to have students avoid these general statements as much as possible. Yes, it's true, but it's not you, right? It's just a general true statement. So let's try to avoid those.
Okay. And if I'm using somebody's name, in this situation, obviously it's not like a HIPAA situation, but is it better to pick a false name and use quotations?
Yeah, so I would always use fake names in these interactions. And again, I probably would consider this HIPAA. Again, these are patients coming to you with the needle exchange stuff. I probably would consider that HIPAA, although technically not, but anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it's still very confidential. Like they come to us under the understanding that it is confidential.
Correct. So. Yeah. Yeah. So always, for an application, I would just use quotes the first time, use pseudonyms. The next thing I wanted to point out that I had highlighted here is this: shaped me into a better servant. Right? So here's where the sales pitch comes in. Right? It's like, I know how to serve. Obviously, as a physician, you're a servant. That's great. It's one thing to show service. It's another thing to say, look at me, I'm a great servant. So that's just the difference between what I recommend and what other people recommend. There's no one right way, but I try to have students just stay away from the sales pitch stuff. Show me that service. Show me interacting with this homeless person, and show me that service in that setting. Okay.
Yeah, I see that.
All right, and then we get to blood drive volunteer. So AMSA, not a ton of hours, and really just don't really see much takeaway or impact here. It's just more like, hey, I did a blood drive, I got recognized. So not anything big here. Physiology.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. In that situation, I also titled that one as not clinical.
So again, it depends, right? You did talk here about monitoring patients here, so potentially maybe that being clinical. So again, it just depends on what you're doing.
Gotcha.
Physiology learning assistant. So you were basically a TA for physiology. And then I wrote here basic, right? Because the first couple lines here are just kind of basic description of what you do as a TA or an LA as you have here. And okay, great. Don't really need to see that. But then you get into a story about Gabby, and it's great, right? A little bit of story showing your impact and the impact you had on this student. So that's awesome. We have some physician shadowing, which is good, from 2019 and 2021. So we like to see that. And how you listed it here is perfectly fine. Just listing the physicians, the specialties, hours, dates, etc.
Okay. So I have a question with that as well.
Yeah.
So the shadowing I did at UBDOC's urgent care was that actually ended up being more than I stated in this application.
Okay.
And it actually turned into a temporary job where I worked for just the summer to help with a specific project. And so I'm thinking of extracting that from this activity and creating a whole new activity for that alone.
Yeah.
Or would you suggest that I separate the job portion from the shadowing portion as two separate?
Yeah, I would put the job separately and keep the shadowing just under shadowing.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right. So then we have medical clinical. And then I see the start of the mistake. Not really the mistake, but the big red flag, I think, in your application. Assuming that first activity that we saw, the harm reduction, isn't clinical, this is the only clinical experience you have on your application. It's in 2019 for a lot of the year for 200 hours. So not a ton of hours for the 8 or 9 months that you were doing it. And I wonder, why so little clinical experience? What happened there?
So at the end of this opportunity, so when I left this hospital, I had moved to attend my university because I was a transfer student. So I had to move. So a lot of my opportunities had to sort of dissolve. I gave myself a quarter to sort of get my footing in my new town and started applying for new volunteering positions at closer hospitals. And then COVID hit. And I had an orientation scheduled to start volunteering in the NICU, and that was canceled. And unfortunately, from that point on until COVID was not over, but until I could get vaccinated, basically, it was really difficult for me to find clinical experiences.
Yeah. Let's go back to the timeline. You said pre-med from the get, 2013.
Yeah.
Where's the experiences then?
Yeah, I didn't know that I needed to do that, and I think so in my mind, when I started school, I wanted to see that I could succeed in school, first of all, before I could really commit to this path. I knew that I was interested in science. If I was going to take any classes, it would have to be science. But I just wanted to prove to myself that I could do okay, because I was not math and science oriented in high school at all. It basically had to start from the bottom.
Okay.
So I needed the time to prove to myself that I could even succeed in school first.
Got it. Very common mistake, right? Students just don't know. They don't understand this process. And a very common thing for non-traditional students as well, although you were kind of a pseudo non-trad at that point, because it wasn't a lot of time after high school, but there was still some time. And that's always, it seems like, the mistake that I see. I was talking to a lawyer a couple months ago who's like, I want to go back to school because I want to be a doctor. I'm like, have you shadowed? Have you gotten any clinical experience? No, I'm just going to go back to school. Everyone thinks going back to school is the first step. Mm-hmm. When ideally, in my mind, it should be, let's go get some experience to test this hypothesis that you want to be a doctor. Mm-hmm. Why waste time going to school to prove that you're a good student when ultimately you may not want to be a doctor? You just have this kind of this idea in your head of like, ooh, I'm romanticizing being a physician, so I'm going to go back to school. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. All right, so that makes sense. So at some point, obviously, it's like, I need to get some clinical experience. I need to put myself around doctors, whatever. And you do that, you move, and then this little thing called a pandemic hits, and so that kind of quashes everything. Makes sense. All right, so a couple things I had highlighted here. Working alongside the physicians, nurses, ER techs, and custodians demonstrated that we are all part of a collaborative team that relied on the unique skills of each member. Again, this very generic, yep, that's true, thing that students just, I don't know where this impulsive need is of like, I know that you have to work as a team. I know that you have to communicate. And so for me, right, this is just my general advice. Like, it doesn't matter. I want to know who you are. I don't want to know that you think you're a good team player and you know that being a team player is part of being a doctor. Right? So just removing a lot of just the super generic, super superficial stuff out of the application and showing me you. So that's what I've highlighted there. And then I wrote here, why was this most meaningful? And my big thing for this is I've been trying to focus most meaningful essay descriptions, the most meaningful essays, not the description, the most meaningful essays literally on why was this most meaningful. And so a lot of students mostly just have an expanded description here, just focusing on other aspects of the experience, but not really answering the question, why was this most meaningful? And you don't have to literally say, this was most meaningful because, but just make sure it's kind of implied. Mm-hmm. And again, the showing here versus telling. So you're like, she had no family support, so I sat at her bedside and created a safe space for her to express her fears about possibly losing a limb. You could have said that same exact thing showing me you right. Just sitting and holding a hand without the sales pitch here. So it's just a style difference that you could get into with the writing style and connecting with that reader a little bit better than just kind of throwing it in their face like that.
Gotcha. So, yeah, that's a good point.
That's just a style thing. Awards and scholarships, that was good. Just a list of things there. No big issues. And then we have jewelry arts teacher, and I highlighted this. Obviously, this is a big part of your life. The jewelry world, as I started to see as the activities started to come into play. And then, again, the focus on the skills that you thought you needed to take away from these things to show that you're going to be a good doctor. That was really my takeaway. It's for a lot of these application renovation videos. Are students thinking they need to show, like, I know that a doctor needs to communicate well, so I'm going to show you how I communicate well. I know that a doctor needs to have good teamwork, so I'm going to show you how I have good teamwork. And I think you miss the point, in my opinion, you miss the point of just connecting human to human of like, hey, I was a jewelry arts teacher. Let me show you that world. Let me show you who I impacted in that world. And that, to me, makes a much bigger impact than you saying, hey, as a jewelry arts teacher, I had to communicate very well with students, and I know as a doctor, I'm going to have to communicate well. There's just a completely different message, completely different story there. So again, the things that I have highlighted are just that focus on the takeaways that you're trying to shove in, or what I call the agenda, right? This is your agenda going in there.
Yeah, it seems that there's this subconscious drive to want to make everything about medicine because it's an application to medical school when the majority of the time that I was teaching, I was not really thinking that much about medicine at all. So
exactly.
to try to make a point where one doesn't exist is stressful.
It's stressful, and it's not true.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, I think the application should be your truth. And when you go back and you insert meaning into an experience that didn't have that meaning, it's not true. You're just forcing it because you think you have to.
Yeah.
All right. And you say subconscious, I guarantee you did this consciously. I need to do this. And so that's interesting. And then obviously a big one here, 6,000 hours. So when I first saw this, before I got down to your true first kind of big experience, I thought maybe this was kind of your life. You're like, oh, you're a choreographer kind of person. And this was really interesting, right? I wrote here, cool experience. You had a lot of very interesting experiences that I think the one school that interviewed you was like, this sounds like a cool person. I want to talk to her. And what I think happened was you were still in sales pitch mode. You still didn't have a ton of experiences to really solidify to be able to communicate why you want to be a doctor. And they were a little skittish about that. And they're like, I don't know if she really understands what's going on here. But she's really cool. She's got a lot of great experiences, but I'm not ready to take that leap with her. So when I look at this, like you have lots of impact through numbers here about how much money you're raising, how many people you're impacting, which is awesome. A little bit of the sales pitch there about working as a team. Again, just throwing that in there. Mm-hmm. Volunteer birth partner. I'd forgot that this was another medical clinical one that you had on here from 2019 into 2020. And I put here a question if this is beyond scope. You're basically saying, hey, I acted as a doula without being a doula. Yeah. And I wonder if this turned off people to go, like, who do you think you are here?
Yeah. I had really received some different advice from all over the place on whether or not I should include this at all, and definitely whether or not I should have included it as clinical.
Yeah.
Mostly because these three, it's 3 births, basically. It's listed those three different times.
Okay.
So since then, and something that I really left out of my application, which I included in my secondaries, was the reason I really wanted to go be a doctor. And I really wanted to be an OBGYN because of these experiences that I saw early on. Since then, I'm now a hospital birth doula, and I have, been accumulating tons of patient experiences, tons of hours, like very patient facing.
Good.
And so it makes more sense now in my current application to even include this and expand on that as my most meaningful experience.
Love it.
And I did change my whole personal statement to include that story.
Yeah, because, and I'm glad you recognize that, right? Because it's like, it doesn't make sense. Like when I read this, and I have it highlighted, when I read this, reinforced my desire to care for women as a future OBGYN. And I read that, and I'm going, okay, I hope I understand that a little bit later. And I got to the end, and I'm like, yep, I don't understand where that statement comes from. Right? So lots of confusion there. And so I'm glad you understood that without me needing to tell you here in this session. So again, at the end of the day, the goal of this application, in my opinion, is show me who you are, not show me how you think you're ready to be a doctor, not show me how you have the skills necessary to be a good doctor. Show me who you are, this journey that you've been on, and tell me why you want to be a doctor. In the personal statement. All right. Yeah. And so if I could succinctly kind of paraphrase your application, it's here's everything that I've done and how I think it's prepared me to be a doctor.
Yeah.
And then your personal statement gets super fancy, and we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
So, okay. So I was a little scared of this one going, I wonder how this is going to be read. Is this beyond scope? Is this whatever? And then we get to the big one, right? Your paid employment, not medical, clinical, jewelry designer, business owner. So I got to this bottom one, and just a reminder for students, what we see here in this PDF is not how medical schools see your activities. It's not how they see your application. This is just the pretty PDF that AMCAS prints out for you or creates for you. And everything, the sort order for the activities is all based on the start date of the activities. And so you as a business owner, jewelry designer, that was your earliest activity starting wise. That's why it's the last one here. So just a reminder for people.
Okay.
And again, like, I would have loved to see jewelry design, why you got into that, why you're passionate about it, the jewelry that you make for people, how that, like, just you thrive, without the angle of here's how it set me up to be a good doctor. Because then I could go, oh my gosh, this is such an amazing experience. That's so cool. Tell me about it, right? I would be prepared for next time for your other interviews. If they're virtual, like, have your jewelry next to you. Like, oh yeah, I just happen to keep a jewelry box here of all my designs. You want to see some? Because that will like take up all of your interview time. And you're just going to talk about jewelry and why you created the piece and what you had in your mind. And did it come out the way that you thought it was in your mind? And what does it mean to you? And what is it to make something like that and to see the finished product? And what does it mean to you when a customer comes and like tears up that you were able to create this thing that they had envisioned? And then you see like all of that stuff that just shows passion and truth to who you are. And instead you're like, oh, it required me to show resilience and flexibility, blah, 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 right? This is like just the opposite of like, oh my gosh, like I don't want to see that.
I was so I had talked a lot, I'm sure you'll get to it, but I talked a lot about jewelry in my personal statement in this original one. My new one, I am not. I'm kind of glossing over the jewelry thing in my new personal statement, but I'm hoping to actually expand a little bit more in the activities section part of that.
Yes.
To talk about it where it's more relevant. Definitely more relevant in the activities section, 1,000% as a most meaningful activity. There's no way this is not a most meaningful activity for you. Yeah. Right? And I think I have two parts of that, right? Because I was a jewelry teacher and I was also a jeweler. So I think what I'm going to do is actually make my jewelry entry my most meaningful and not the teaching one.
Why not both?
Because I can only pick 3 and being a doula is definitely a really important one, like a massively important one for me. So I'm going to make that one.
There's the third one.
And then I really like the performance arts choreographer one. I mean, I really like that highlights my leadership skills because
stop. That's exactly where I don't want you to go.
Okay.
That's exactly where I don't want you to go. Mm-hmm. Don't mark it most meaningful because you think it's going to highlight a skill.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That is not how to put together the application. Right? Reflect on your truth. Mm-hmm. I guarantee you, having just met you however many minutes ago, I guarantee you that your truth is jewelry designer, jewelry teacher, and doula as your most meaningful activities for who you are as a person.
Yeah, I mean, that is totally true. I think why I didn't in the first place was because I thought I was trying to be careful to not make jewelry the star of the show. And so if I had 3 opportunities to talk about it.
But jewelry is who you are.
Yeah.
The application is a reflection of who you are. Mm-hmm. And if you're applying to medical school, it hopefully shows who you are in terms of why you want to be a doctor as well. And the doula part will be on there to hopefully expand on that in terms of getting experiences to help the reader understand that you understand what you're getting yourself into. Hopefully it has shadowing. And then the personal statement hopefully explains how you got here.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Notice nowhere in there did I say, should the application show that you have good leadership skills?
Right.
Okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. Tell your truth.
Okay.
The
Well,
truth
I
shall
mean,
set you free, as they say.
I mean, the performance arts group is a really big part of who I am too. You know, it tells a story of who I am also. I wish I could have every experience be most meaningful, because I could talk about all of these
Yeah.
experiences in that capacity. So just picking the ones that are,
Yeah.
the most of the most meaningful is difficult.
Got it. So let's move to the personal statement, and where I think the application for me just completely fell flat in terms of you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. At least you didn't tell me that in your personal statement, right? It sounds like you saved it for the secondary essays, which I'm not even getting to that point with your application, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it's not because of your stats. It's not because of the CAR score. It's because you, based on your primary application, don't have enough experiences to show me that you want to be a doctor. And in your personal statement, my assumption is that you went into the personal statement saying being a jeweler is creativity. Creativity makes a good doctor. I'm going to tie it all together in that way.
That's pretty much it. I did take a class. I took a health professions writing class where we actually had to write our personal statement in our class.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we were suggested to do was to pick a theme and have the theme sort of carry through the personal statement. And at the end of it, I said I've rewritten it since then, and I've completely dismantled that theme.
Yeah.
So
Good.
it was really, really forced.
Yeah, good. All right, you'll have to tell me offline who taught this class, because I'm gonna I'm gonna have a word with them. They're not doing students a favor by going down that path. It's very forced. Again, this whole forced nature is not truth. Truth is what really helps connect. I'm sure you've had people in your life where you just knew how fake they were being with how they talk to you, and oh my gosh, like, how are you? I'm like, why are you asking? Like, you don't care about me. So when I read a personal statement, I get that same like yucky feeling of like, you don't care about this. Like, you're just trying to force this. Okay. So I'm going to kind of gloss over this, because the bulk of the essay is basically that of like just jewelry, creative, jewelry, dedication, doctor, creative, doctor, dedication. And so again, you have this kind of connection of creative equals doctor, and it just doesn't, right? Creative doesn't equal doctor. Are good doctors creative? Maybe. Are bad doctors creative? Maybe. I don't know. I don't think you can't make that correlation there. Or you could make the correlation, but I don't know. There's no causation there. And this is a very common essay that I read from people who don't have enough experience to talk about why they want to be a doctor, or they just have, in my opinion, the wrong idea of what a personal statement should be. And so we get to the end, right? It takes courage to overcome the fear of being brazenly creative. Like, okay. Again, just I highlighted a bunch of the buzzwords that you're kind of trying to throw out there in terms of how you're ready to be a doctor. And then I extracted many lessons in humanity from my experience as an emergency department volunteer. I'm like, oh, that's only 200 hours. I don't know how many experiences you could have there. But again, that's just what you had, so that's what you worked with. At the end of the day, and it sounds like you understand this a little bit more, the goal is to talk about why you want to be a doctor, reflect on these experiences that you are showing, that you are choosing to show to the admissions committee, this reviewer, about who you are and why you want to be a doctor, and reflecting on those experiences to show them, like, this is why this is so important for me to tell you. When you kind of finish up with, he validated and humanized her with the potency of a well-mastered art. Like, there's no connection there. It's about the doctor, first of all. It has nothing to do with you, other than you trying to, again, force this narrative of art and creativity and all this stuff. So, again, I'm not going to keep harping. It sounds like you know, but for students to understand, right? A forced thematic personal statement, I've seen maybe one work, maybe two. out of the thousands of personal statements that I read. They just don't work because it's not truth. It's forced. Okay. And again, the end of the day, why do you want to be a doctor? Okay. And so, right, I believe my determination and commitment to excellence will support me through the rigors of medical school and well into my career as a physician. Very common theme of I'm ready, I'm committed, I can do this. I'm telling you I can do it. Therefore, just accept me already. Okay. Mm-hmm. When the truth is you have no idea until you're actually in it, and then you're like, oh crap, what was I thinking?
I really needed the time, to really think about this and put it aside, because I think I was so hyper focused on writing it for so long that I couldn't zoom out and see the whole picture. So having the year pass and then be able to re-examine it has been really great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And then school lists, you're a state resident of where?
California.
Okay, so you're a California resident. And so we have FIU, I believe, is public. FIU and FAU, I think, are both public. I always confuse those two. Private, OHSU is public. Be careful with them because typically, I don't know if it's an unwritten rule, like for out-of-state residents, they want like a pretty high MCAT score before they'll look at you. Rush private, Stanford private, UCLA public. Arizona public schools, one of them is a little bit more in-state friendly than the other. So as long as you're just making educated decisions, obviously the UC schools are going to be state schools, so that's great. Colorado is an out-of-state friendly school, which is good. UW typically not an out-of-state friendly school. And then Washington State is a private school. So I think they're private. Are they? I'm pretty sure.
Well, so they are Washington only, but I was born and raised in Washington State. I have all of my family there. So I have ties to both. So I could actually apply to both schools, but they are very mission driven to repopulating Washington's doctors. So,
awesome.
That was.
Okay. And then Cal North State and Cal University, both private schools. And then Cal North State for everyone having some accreditation issues. So buyer beware there. So school lists, not bad. So we get to the end. And again, the kind of check-in that I like to do at the end is, does this student, number one, are they academically capable? From a stats perspective, you are, right? You're 507, perfectly fine. Your 388 science GPA, great. From a stats perspective, you're academically capable. Now, will the 507 close some doors for you? Maybe. And will a higher score help? Always. A higher score always helps. The next big question that I come to is, do you have the experiences to be able to reflect? Not that you did reflect, but do you have the experiences to be able to reflect? And based on what you have, the answer is no, as of this last application. The application coming up, it sounds like you have a lot more experience that you'll be able to reflect on, which is great. Then I get to the personal statement. And do I understand, after reading the personal statement, why you want to be a doctor? Notice how I don't say, are you sure you're determined enough to be a doctor? Are you sure you have the teamwork and communication skills necessary to be a doctor? Why do you want to be a doctor? Because at the end of the day, the goal of the medical school is to accept and educate and graduate students who are going to come out of school and be tiny little mini doctor evangelists of that education, of that school, of that institution, and are going to hopefully come out and go, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I love being a doctor. I loved having my training at insert school here. And for students who don't have the experience to be able to understand that, what they're getting themselves into, or at least to communicate it in a personal statement, potentially, and this is where schools get a little skittish, potentially schools will avoid that interview and acceptance because they don't want to graduate students who are just jaded and burnt out on the other end. Because those aren't little mini evangelists.
Right.
All right. It's a very selfish reason that they're making sure that they're accepting students who are going to come out on the other end and be evangelists and graduate in 4 years because that's looked at from an accreditation standpoint, who are going to pass the boards because that affects matching, which affects accreditation stuff. Like it all is intertwined very selfishly for the schools. And then sure, there's some nice stuff for you. Like you don't want to get a year or two into medical school tuition and realize you don't want to be a doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a lot of reflection in the process of writing secondaries also, which was what I really should have done before I even applied, was do the enormous amount of reflection that I did after I've already submitted my application.
Yeah.
And I think that is really going to help me moving forward, because just the process of writing all those essays really answers the question, why is this important to me? Why do I want to be a doctor?
Yeah.
In the process of doing those activities, I was not reflecting in the way that I should. And so I don't know, that was a really helpful exercise. It was like a little bit too late, but still really helpful.
Still helpful. You end up getting one interview. So there was one admissions committee out there, one reviewer out there that probably really liked the experiences that you had. You had great experiences. And they were just hoping that you just didn't know what you were doing with your primary. And again, secondaries, maybe you did some great reflection and they're like, okay, like it's not just all sales pitch. Let me talk. And then whatever happened with the interview happened, and hopefully moving forward again with deeper reflection and a year of time between now and then, you'll have a much better solid footing on who you are, why you're here, and you'll be able to communicate that better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope so. And I'm confident that I will be. I feel like I know where these gaps are, and I'm really appreciative for your time to help highlight some of the ones that I didn't see before. Yeah. So I feel confident that I can tell my story a little bit better the next time and show that I have the experiences, to back it up.
Yeah, it sounds like you do. Any last second takeaways here to help you?
I do have one quick question about the birth experiences. So I was not a doula back then, but I was acting as a doula.
Yep.
But now I am a doula, and I am trained as a doula, and I work as a doula.
Yep.
So is it appropriate to make that one entry, because my first birth that I attended was in 2009.
Yep.
So there would be 4 different date pockets for that. But is it appropriate to keep those entries in, the older entries in?
So it depends is the answer. It always depends. I don't think, especially with how small those hours are, it's about 200 hours roughly, right? Those 200 hours aren't going to make or break your application. Going back to 2009 isn't going to make or break your application. You could potentially, assuming you tell your truth and being a doula is the most meaningful activity for you, you'll have space to just mention, like going back to 2009 when you first helped a friend with their birth. Mm-hmm. And just in the description itself, mention it. And then the actual activity of being a doula is going to be whatever the date range is where you actually were a doula.
Yeah, because I'm definitely telling that story. The one in 2009 was like a very important story and driving me to medicine. And that's how I'm starting my new personal statement. So awesome. That's a really important story. I'm hoping to tell a little better. And
that's the big story that I'm missing. I want to know how did you get here, right? What drew you away from obviously something you were super passionate about in terms of being a goldsmith, being a jewelry maker, to go, well, I'm going to go back to school, something I've struggled at previously, at least for the few classes you have on your transcript, to enter a career that is completely different than making jewelry.
Yeah.
So I'm missing, I want to know that story. So if you can tell me that story in your next application, all the better. And then we'll get you on Mission Accepted and we'll compare and contrast.
I hope so. That's the plan.